My name is Evan Marlowe, and I can still hear the sound of silverware tapping against porcelain that night. A rhythm that should have felt familiar, but instead pressed against my chest like a warning. I had driven in from Denver that afternoon, the sky still heavy with early winter clouds, and walked into my parents' house telling myself this would be just another family dinner. A simple meal, a few polite questions, the usual awkward small talk. Nothing more, nothing less. But the moment I stepped through the doorway, I felt it. A shift in the air, the way people sense a storm before it breaks. Patricia moved through the kitchen with her usual tight smile, her shoulders stiff in that way she had when she was determined to pretend everything was fine. Robert sat at the table already, turning a napkin over in his hands like he was studying something written on it. My sister Lydia was leaning back in her chair, scrolling through her phone, her foot tapping the leg of the table in that restless rhythm I had known since we were kids. She didn't look up when I came in. She didn't say hello either. That wasn't surprising. Lately, every interaction with her had become a silent guessing game of how long it would take before the temperature in the room dropped. I hung my jacket on the back of the chair and sat down. The table was already set. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes with a lake of melted butter in the middle. A meal meant to feel comforting. A meal meant to say we're still a family. But there was something off. Something tight and brittle beneath every little movement. The scrape of a chair, the clink of a glass being set down. Even the sound of my own breathing felt too loud. Patricia poured herself a small glass of white wine and took a sip before sitting. Robert kept avoiding my eyes, glancing around the room like he was waiting for instructions on how to behave. I tried to start the conversation with something neutral: weather, work, the drive-in, the kind of filler talk families rely on when they don't actually know how to speak to each other anymore. Each word I offered fell flat, landing in the center of the table like pebbles dropped into a well with no echo. It wasn't until halfway through the meal that Lydia finally lifted her face from her phone. She didn't say my name. She didn't smile. She just stared at me, her eyes steady and cold in a way that made the backs of my arms prickle. I waited, a fork hovering in my hand, unsure whether she was about to make a joke or pick a fight. With Lydia, it was often the same thing. She leaned farther back in her chair and crossed her arms. The tapping of her foot stopped. The whole room seemed to still with her. When she finally spoke, her voice was slow, like she wanted to savor every word. "You know what you are, Evan. You're dead weight. We'd all be better off if we didn't have to carry you." I felt something heavy drop inside me. Not anger, not shock, just a kind of hollow quiet that spread beneath my ribs. For a moment, I honestly believed I had misheard her. But then I saw Patricia's reaction, and any hope of misunderstanding disappeared. Patricia smiled, just a faint curling at the corner of her mouth as she picked up her wine and took a long, slow sip. Not a laugh, not a gasp of disapproval, no attempt to soothe the moment or soften the blow. Just a small, quiet agreement written across her face, like this was something she had thought many times before. Robert didn't move. His eyes stayed on his plate, fixed and desperate, like looking at me might pull him into a conflict he had no intention of entering. His shoulders tightened, then sagged. That tiny shift told me everything. He wasn't going to defend me. He wasn't going to defend anyone. He was going to wait until it passed and pretend he never heard a thing. I put my fork down. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. There was no dramatic burst of emotion, no raised tone or trembling outrage. What I felt in that moment was something quieter and far more dangerous than anger. It was clarity, pure, clear silence that made every breath feel steady. I stood from the table. The chair legs scraped against the floor, and for a heartbeat, no one looked up. Lydia smirked lightly like she'd scored a point in a fight she had been rehearsing. Patricia adjusted her napkin. Robert pressed his lips together, then released them, still refusing to meet my eyes. I didn't say a word as I walked toward the door. I didn't yell or argue or ask why. I had learned over years of small cuts and subtle dismissals that no explanation would ever change what already lived in their minds. They saw me the way they wanted to see me, and nothing I said would rewrite the version of me Lydia had just spoken aloud. My hand was already on the doorknob when I heard Patricia's voice drifting after me, soft, almost cheerful, as if relieved something unspoken had finally been said. Well, maybe now things will finally get easier. The words hit harder than Lydia's insult. They weren't sharp. They weren't even cruel. They were casual, offhand, like she had been waiting for someone to declare that I didn't belong there. I stepped outside into the cold evening air before anyone could see the look on my face. The sun had slipped behind the mountains a while ago, leaving a faint blue haze across the neighborhood. Porch lights blinked on one by one. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The world kept moving as if nothing had changed, as if nothing inside that house had cracked open. I walked toward my car slowly, the gravel crunching under my shoes. Each step felt like shedding a layer of weight I didn't realize I had been carrying. When I reached the car door, I paused and looked back at the house. The dining room window glowed softly, the silhouette of my family still gathered around a table I had sat at my entire childhood. They didn't look toward the door. They didn't notice I was gone. Or maybe they did, and simply didn't care enough to react. I opened the car door, got inside, and exhaled a breath that had been stuck in my chest for years. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I needed distance. Enough distance to breathe without feeling someone else's expectations pressing against me. The engine started quietly, the hum filling the silence. I backed out of the driveway and watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. The neighborhood faded into the shadows as I drove away. I didn't look back again. Morning light was breaking by the time I eased the car into a quiet residential street in North Denver. The sky was pale and washed out, the kind of winter morning that feels both empty and forgiving. I pulled up in front of Mason and Hannah Kellogg's place, a small split-level house with a wide porch and a wind chime that made a soft metallic whisper in the breeze. I sat for a moment in the car, hands still on the wheel, letting the hum of the engine fade out of my body, before I finally reached for the keys and stepped outside. Mason opened the front door almost immediately. He must have heard my car. He was still in pajama pants and an old gray hoodie, his hair sticking up like he had been awake and pacing long before he saw me. He did not ask what happened. He just stepped back and let me in, the way only an old friend knows how to do. Hannah appeared from the hallway with a blanket folded over her arm. Her face softened when she saw me. She offered the blanket without a word, then motioned toward the couch like she had already made that decision for me hours ago. I lowered myself onto the cushions, grateful for the quiet, grateful that no one was asking anything of me. My whole body felt tight from holding myself together through the drive. I must have fallen asleep right there, still wearing my jacket. Because when my eyes opened again, the blanket Hannah had given me was tucked around my shoulders, and the living room was glowing with soft mid-morning sunlight. For a long moment, I could not remember where I was. Then it all came back in a wave. The dinner table, Lydia's voice, Patricia's smile, the cold walk to my car, driving until the sky began to lighten. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a low, insistent vibration that pulled me fully awake. When I reached for it, the screen lit up so brightly it almost hurt my eyes. I blinked twice before I really registered what I was seeing. 41 missed calls, every single one from my family, the first few around midnight, then one at 2 in the morning, a cluster at 4, more at 6, then dozens while I slept. My stomach tightened, not in fear, not in guilt. Something else entirely, something like disbelief. Maybe, just last night, Lydia had said I was nothing but dead weight. Patricia had not even tried to hide the relief in her eyes when I stood up from the table. They had made it clear I meant nothing to them. And now, hours later, they were calling like their lives had split open. Mason came in from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one on the table and sat in the armchair across from me. He studied my face in that quiet way he had always done, giving me space to speak or stay silent. I glanced down at the phone again and exhaled. They called me all night. He nodded slightly. Lights were on at the house when I drove by earlier, he said. Looked like someone was digging through things. A lot of pacing, some shouting. My chest tightened. I could picture it too easily. Patricia rifling through drawers, Robert muttering under his breath, Lydia pacing like a cornered animal, and on the table between them, the folder I had left behind. The folder containing 5 years of bills I had paid without complaint. The folder showing exactly how deeply they had leaned on me while pretending not to notice. The folder with the letter from attorney Eleanor Price confirming I was no longer responsible for their mortgage, utilities, or overdue accounts. I imagined Lydia flipping through each page, her face tightening with every new line item. I imagined Patricia reading the letter from Eleanor, realizing in a slow creeping way that I was not coming back to fix what they had left undone. My phone vibrated again. Not a call this time. A voicemail, then another, 3 in less than a minute. I let them sit there for a while before finally pressing play on the most recent one. Evan. Lydia's voice cracked through the speaker. What did you do? The internet is down and nothing is working, and Mom said you left something on the table, and I swear this is not funny. You cannot just walk out. Call me back. Now. I hit stop. Mason watched me but didn't speak. Hannah came into the room then, tying her hair back, and paused when she saw the look on my face. A lot of calls, she said softly. 41, I answered. She pulled in a breath and gave a sympathetic half smile. You hungry? I can make eggs. Food felt impossible, but I nodded anyway. It was easier than refusing kindness. While she moved toward the kitchen, I leaned back into the couch, letting the blanket fall softly over my shoulders. My mind drifted to the moment last night when I had placed the folder in the center of the table. I had done it quietly, almost gently, setting it down like a final piece of truth. I did not write a note. I did not leave a warning. Everything they needed to know was in that folder. I had hesitated for only a moment, scanning the dining room that held so many years of meals, arguments, and hollow apologies. Then I turned off the lights and walked out. I had not expected the weight of that choice to feel both terrifying and strangely peaceful. Now, sitting on Mason's couch, sipping coffee that tasted stronger than anything I had made for myself in months, I felt that same mix of fear and relief. It settled into me gradually, like warmth returning to numb skin. A notification flashed on my screen. This time it was a text from my mother. Evan, we need to talk. Call me back, please. I stared at the message for a long time before setting the phone face down. The truth was beginning to unfold inside that house. The safety net they always assumed would hold was gone. The bills they had let slide were now undeniable. And the person they had dismissed as dead weight was no longer standing between them and the consequences they had chosen not to face. Hannah placed a plate of eggs on the table beside me, just as another voicemail buzzed. I let it go unanswered. Outside the window, the sunlight grew brighter, washing over the room, softening the edges of furniture and casting a warm glow across the floor. It felt strange to sit in a place so quiet, while turbulence swelled somewhere miles away in a house I no longer belonged to. When breakfast was done, Mason asked if I wanted to get some fresh air. We stepped outside into the crisp Denver air, watching our breath curl into little clouds. He did not push for details. He did not offer solutions. He just walked beside me, hands in his pockets, the way he used to in college when life felt simpler and problems were things we could outrun. My phone buzzed again, muffled in my jacket. I did not reach for it. We stood on the sidewalk for a while, listening to the soft hum of traffic on the main road and the distant bark of a dog. The world felt open in a way it had not felt for me in years, like I had stepped out of a narrow hallway into a wide field. After a few minutes, we headed back inside. I picked up my phone again, this time letting myself see the full list of missed calls, 41, and beneath that, 6 voicemails, all waiting, all demanding attention I no longer felt willing to give. One message stood out. Recorded around 3 in the morning, it was short. Just a breath at the start, and my name spoken too carefully. My mother, her voice thin and wavering. Evan, please, call home. I locked the screen. The sun was beginning its slow climb, brightening the room inch by inch, making everything look sharper, clearer. I sat with that clarity for a while, listening to the quiet house around me. There was no shouting here, no accusations, no shifting blame, just space. And the simple truth that for the first time in a long while, I could choose what happened next. I tightened the blanket around my shoulders and exhaled, steady and long, letting the morning settle into me. The messages could wait. The consequences already unfolding in that house could wait too. For now, I just needed to breathe. The quiet in Mason and Hannah's living room settled around me like a blanket, warm at first, then slowly revealing the weight underneath. I watched the sunlight crawl along the carpet, inch by inch, until it reached my shoes. Something about it made my chest ache, the kind of ache that comes when you finally stop running long enough to feel what has been chasing you. I sat up, pushed the blanket aside, and rubbed my hands over my face. Sleep had come and gone quickly, leaving me with a heavy clarity that I had not allowed myself in years. I could still hear Lydia's words from the night before, sharp and careless, echoing inside my ribs. Dead weight. Even now, they stung less than the look on my mother's face. That faint curl of satisfaction. That silence that said she had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. A part of me wanted to close my eyes again, force myself back into the half-dream where none of it existed. But I knew better. The truth had already unfolded. The calls, the panic. The house I had held together was finally showing its cracks. The ones I had tried for years to fill with overtime shifts and perfectly timed payments. I stood and walked into the kitchen, where Hannah was rinsing a pan in the sink. She looked over her shoulder, her expression soft with a kind of understanding you cannot fake. "You slept longer than I expected," she said gently. "Breakfast is still warm if you want more." I thanked her and shook my head. My stomach felt tight, like a fist had been sitting there all night. Mason came in from the backyard, brushing cold air from his sleeves. He studied my face for a moment, the way only someone who has known you for decades can do. "Want to sit outside for a bit?" he asked. "Sometimes air helps sort things out." I nodded, mostly because doing nothing felt worse. We stepped onto the back deck, where the wood creaked softly beneath our feet. The yard stretched out behind the house, a small patch of grass bordered by a line of aspen trees. Their branches rattled in the wind, catching bits of pale morning light. I leaned against the railing and let my eyes unfocus. Memories rose in slow drifting pieces, each one falling into place like a puzzle I had been avoiding. Back in 2010, I had been 25 and too ambitious for my own good. That was the year I started my bookkeeping company in Seattle, working nights and weekends while everyone else my age seemed to be out building lives with people instead of spreadsheets. But I loved the work, the rhythm of gathering chaos and turning it into order. Clients trusted me. Word spread. By 2016, I had an office, a small team, and a future I thought I had built with my own hands. Then 2017 came with a call from Patricia, telling me Robert had collapsed while repairing a fence for a neighbor. The words had come out thin and trembling. Hospital bills, tests, surgeries, insurance complications. She was trying to sound calm, but every pause told the truth she did not want to say. I flew home the next morning, sitting beside my father's hospital bed, watching him struggle to breathe. I felt something inside me shift. I had always been the one who left home, the one who built a life somewhere else. But the idea of losing him pulled everything out of focus. I told myself I would help for a little while, just until he got better, just until things steadied. I remember the day Patricia showed me the mortgage notice. She tried to glide past it as if it were a simple misunderstanding, but the paper trembled slightly in her hand. Behind on payments, accrued interest, possible foreclosure if unresolved. She pushed a smile into place and said it would work out. It had been a long few months. That was all. They just needed a little help. A little help became a few checks, then monthly payments, then insurance, then property taxes. Each time I stepped in, telling myself I could handle it, the house felt more and more like a sinking ship with me plugging holes faster than I could count them. By 2019, the weight had grown too heavy to balance alongside the company. I remember staring at my office window late one night, the city lights reflecting off the glass, thinking I could not keep both lives upright anymore. The sale offer came a week later, $220,000, less than the company was worth, but enough to clear the medical debt and catch up the mortgage. Enough to keep the house I grew up in from becoming someone else's problem. I signed the paperwork at a small conference table with my hands shaking beneath the surface. The buyer shook my hand. My employees hugged me, and I drove out of Seattle with my car packed full and my heart feeling strangely hollow. Colorado Springs was supposed to be temporary, a year, maybe two, while they stabilized. I took the job at Rocky Mountain Home Goods because it was steady. Even if it paid less than what I had made before, I kept copies of every payment, every email confirmation, every late notice I resolved. 5 years of quietly plugging leaks in a ship that never stopped taking on water. I learned how to read Patricia's tone when she wanted something, the bright cheerfulness that barely covered the strain. I learned how to recognize the shift in Lydia's mood when she needed money but did not want to ask outright. I learned the way Robert tightened his jaw when he felt guilty but would not say it. I leaned farther over the railing and let out a slow breath. Mason stood beside me, his hands resting loosely in his pockets. "You carried a lot," he said quietly. I did not answer. The truth of it settled too easily. I had carried more than they ever saw, more than they ever wanted to see. The wind picked up lightly, brushing cold air across my face. My mind replayed the moment last night when Lydia leaned back in her chair and said what she said. It was not the insult itself that had gutted me. It was how quickly it landed, how practiced it sounded, like the thought had lived in her for a long time. And the way Patricia had reacted told me it was not just Lydia's thought. It was theirs. I pushed my hands against the railing, grounding myself in the rough wood beneath my palms. Behind me, inside the house, my phone buzzed faintly on the coffee table. Another call, another voicemail. Mason glanced toward the sound. "You going to check that?" "Not yet." He nodded, accepting it without judgment. The sunlight grew warmer across the yard, and for the first time in years, I let myself stand still without rehearsing the next bill, the next crisis, the next thing they needed. I had walked away from that house last night, but the truth was I had been drifting away long before that. Every unnoticed sacrifice, every unacknowledged payment, every time they smiled and let me carry the weight alone. It had been happening for years. Lydia's words had simply been the final push. I stepped back from the railing, feeling steadier than I expected. The wind whispered softly through the aspens. Inside the house, my phone buzzed again, persistent and sharp, reminding me that whatever fallout had begun in Colorado Springs was still unfolding. I was not ready to listen to any of it, not yet. The wind quieted as I stepped back inside, and the warmth of the living room wrapped around me in a way that felt almost foreign. My phone sat exactly where I had left it on the coffee table, vibrating every few minutes like it had something urgent to say. I walked past it without picking it up. I was not ready to hear anything from that house. Not the panic, not the excuses, not the rehearsed concern that always came too late. I poured myself a glass of water in the kitchen, letting the coolness ground me. Hannah was wiping down the counter, her movements soft and steady. She glanced at me with a question in her eyes, but did not ask it out loud. She never had to. She had always understood that some stories need space before they can be told. I leaned against the counter and exhaled, letting memories drift up again. Not the sharp, fresh ones from last night, but older ones. The ones that had settled inside me like sediment over time. Growing up, the house I lived in was never particularly loud, but it was never balanced either. Lydia arrived 3 years after me, and from the beginning my mother treated her like a small sun around which the rest of the household revolved. Some families have favorites in quiet ways, barely noticeable unless you are the child who is not chosen. In our home, it was not quiet. Patricia protected Lydia from every small disappointment, praised her for every minor success, and excused every misstep she made. I had learned early not to expect much. I was the one who did my own science projects without supervision, who remembered permission slips, who cleaned my own room because nobody reminded me. Lydia would forget everything except the things she wanted, and even those were often handed to her without effort. I thought about the way she used to hold out her report card proudly, even when the grades were mediocre. Patricia would beam at her and tell her she was brilliant and special. If I brought home straight A's, Patricia would say that was expected because I was the responsible one. There was no pride in her voice, just inevitability. At the time, I told myself I did not mind. Maybe it did not matter. Maybe that was simply the shape of our family. But as the years passed, those small moments stacked on top of one another. And when I left home at 18, it was because I needed air that did not feel rationed. Lydia never understood that. She told people I abandoned the family. Patricia never corrected her. Now I could see clearly how that old imbalance had grown into something sharper, heavier, something that pressed directly into the center of last night. Lydia did not call me dead weight out of sudden cruelty. She said what she had been taught to believe, and Patricia had validated it with a smile. The water in my glass trembled slightly as my hand tightened. I set it down and walked into the living room again. The phone buzzed just as I entered, and curiosity nudged at me. I picked it up and scrolled through the recent calls. My mother had called again twice. Lydia had called 4 more times. The house number had called 7 times in a row. Then a text came in from Paula Simmons. My parents' neighbor. It surprised me enough that I opened it. Evan, is everything okay at your parents' house? Things seem tense. Call if you need anything. I stared at the message. Paula had always been kind but cautious. The type of neighbor who stayed out of drama unless something weighed on her conscience. For her to reach out meant she had seen or heard enough to feel uncomfortable. A shiver ran up my spine. I did not know exactly what was happening inside that house this morning, but I knew it was unraveling fast. I sank onto the couch, sinking into the quiet, letting the memories continue to surface. There were too many moments to count when Lydia had acted entitled, when Patricia had backed her with a gentle but unwavering loyalty. If Lydia forgot to pay her phone bill, Patricia would tell me that I should help because I had a better job. If Lydia missed a deadline, Patricia would ask me to talk to her clients, convince them to give her another chance. Robert stayed silent through all of it. He was a man who had learned early that conflict was best avoided. His quiet was not cruel, it was hollow, the kind of emptiness that made you realize no one was coming to rescue you. I thought of the day I found out Lydia had been telling neighbors I lived off my parents' money. Paula had told me that with a tight expression, like she expected me to be angry or embarrassed. But I had only felt tired. Bone-deep tired. I remembered Lydia asking me last year to help cover her computer repair. She had spilled coffee on her laptop while watching shows in bed. She came to me with the same tone she used when we were kids, expecting a solution to materialize. I paid it without complaint. Not because I wanted to, but because arguing felt exhausting. It was that same exhaustion that had kept me from recognizing how deeply the roles had been cemented. Lydia could do no wrong. I could do no enough. And Patricia, caught between denial and favoritism, kept encouraging the imbalance without ever naming it. A sharp knock at the front door jolted me from my thoughts. Hannah came out of the kitchen and gave me a startled look. She peeked through the blinds, then stepped back. "It is Paula," she said quietly. My stomach tightened again. I walked to the door and opened it. Paula stood on the porch, her coat zipped to her chin, her hands gripping her tote bag like she was afraid it might fly away. Her eyes were full of worry, and something else too, something like hesitation. "Evan, I am sorry to drop by unannounced. I thought you might be here." I stepped aside to let her in. She walked into the living room with a kind of nervous energy that made me brace myself. "I do not want to intrude," she said, "but I think you should know that things looked very tense at your parents' place this morning. I saw your sister outside on the porch pacing back and forth. She looked upset and she kept saying you left something important. And your mother was sorting through a stack of papers. And she did not look well. I wanted to check on you." Her voice wavered slightly at the end. She had always been one of the only neighbors who treated me normally. Her concern felt genuine, and for a moment it softened something in me that had felt rigid for years. "Thank you, Paula, I appreciate you coming by." She hesitated again, then lowered her voice. "Evan, I think they are scared. Something about those papers you left. It sounded like things they did not expect to see." My throat tightened. I imagined Patricia sifting through 5 years of bills with shaking hands, her world shifting with every line item she once chose not to see. I imagined Lydia discovering numbers she never realized existed, seeing that the safety she thought her mother provided had always come from me. Paula reached out and touched my arm gently. "If you need anything, you know where I live." After she left, silence wrapped around the room again. A tight pressure settled behind my ribs. Something had shifted permanently inside that house. Something irreversible. I sat down slowly, letting the truth settle fully. The dynamic I had lived under for decades was unraveling, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel responsible for fixing it. My phone buzzed again. This time I did not look away. My phone buzzed again, a low, insistent vibration that filled the quiet room, and this time I let myself look at the screen. Lydia's name flashed again, stacked over earlier missed calls and voicemails, as if repetition could force a response out of me. The sight stirred something sharp in my chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of worn-out recognition. This was always how she reacted when something slipped out of her control. Push harder, demand louder, pretend she was the one who had been wronged. I locked the screen and set the phone on the arm of the couch. For a long moment, I simply sat there, elbows on my knees, my hands clasped together. Something inside me felt loose, as if the foundation I had built my entire adult life on had quietly cracked. And yet, beneath the strange ache of it, there was also a steadiness I had not known I was capable of. Mason walked in from the hallway carrying his laptop under one arm. He stopped when he saw my face, studying me with that same quiet patience that had gotten us both through college exams and breakups, and every moment when life had felt heavier than our shoulders could carry. He asked if I wanted some space or company. I told him company was fine, because the truth was I did not want to sit in silence with my own thoughts any longer. He sat across from me and waited. He never pressed, never demanded I explain myself. That was one of the things I valued most about him. After a minute, I found myself speaking before I even realized the words had formed. I think it has been building for longer than I admitted. He nodded slightly, encouraging without pushing, so I kept going. I started remembering things, moments that felt small at the time, but were really pieces of a much bigger picture. Like the way Mom always excused Lydia's behavior, even when it hurt someone. How she told me it was my responsibility to understand Lydia, not the other way around. Or how she would ask me to fix things for Lydia before she ever asked Lydia to fix them herself. Mason leaned back in his chair, eyes focused on me. I could tell he had heard versions of these stories before, but not like this, not connected, not in order. It was always easier to pretend it was not happening. I said, it felt simpler to just help again than to insist she learn to do it herself. He gave a quiet hum, the kind that invited me to continue. I thought about last fall when Lydia spilled coffee on her laptop and told Mom she needed a replacement immediately because she had deadlines. Instead of telling Lydia to take responsibility, Mom called me while I was at work, insisting it was an emergency. I remember leaving early, driving across town, and paying for the repair. Neither of them said thank you. They acted like I had done exactly what I was supposed to do. My voice tightened as the memory settled again, and when I tried to say something, Mom told me not to make things harder. She said family takes care of each other, but it has always been me taking care of them. Always. Mason took this in without interrupting. He had seen enough of my life to know I was not exaggerating. A new memory surfaced, one that hit harder than I expected. Do you remember the year I moved back? Right after Dad got out of the hospital, I asked. You came to help me move furniture. Mom pulled you aside and told you how grateful she was that I had come home because Lydia would have struggled alone. She did not mention the cost, or the company I sold. She only said Lydia needed me. Mason's eyebrows drew together, and he looked down for a moment, processing that. It was like that all the time, I continued. Every crisis belonged to Lydia. Every solution belonged to me. Mom framed it as balance. Dad stayed quiet. Lydia never saw it at all. My phone buzzed again on the arm of the couch, harder this time, persistent. I let it vibrate until it stopped. I stood and walked toward the window, needing the view of the street to steady me. Bare branches waved in the cold breeze, scraping lightly against each other. Somewhere down the road, a car door slammed. A dog barked twice. Life kept going while mine felt paused between the old world and whatever waited ahead. Out of nowhere, I remembered a conversation from years ago, when Lydia had lost another job. She came home furious and swore the manager hated her. Mom brought her hot tea, told her she was brilliant, told her some people cannot handle confident women. I had suggested kindly that maybe Lydia should update her resume or talk to HR about expectations. Mom glared at me like I had attacked Lydia instead of offering support. Later, she told me privately that Lydia was delicate and I should try to be more understanding. Delicate. That was the word she always used to protect Lydia from consequences. Maybe that is why the word deadweight had not surprised me as much as it should have. Lydia had been carrying so little responsibility her entire life that she could not imagine a world where she owed anyone anything. And she had been taught by my mother that she did not have to. As these memories ran through me, I felt something sharp loosen in my chest. Not grief exactly, not anger either. More like acknowledgement. Recognition that the family I had been trying to save was not the family I had grown up imagining. It had never been equal, never been balanced, and last night had only pulled the skin away from what had been there all along. Hannah returned to the living room carrying a laundry basket filled with folded towels. She paused when she saw me standing by the window. Everything all right? She asked softly. I turned slightly, offering a small, tired smile. I think I am starting to understand things I did not want to see before. She nodded like she understood every word and set the basket down before heading to the hallway again. The simplicity of her support grounded me in a way my own family never had. My phone buzzed once more, a text this time. I reached for it, not out of willingness, but because the silence had begun to feel heavy again. Lydia had messaged me in her usual frantic tone. "Mom says you left something important here and everything is a mess now. You need to come back and talk to us." There was no apology, no expression of concern, only the expectation that I should return to fix what had fallen apart in my absence. It read exactly like every request she had ever made. I saved the message but did not respond. A dull ache rose behind my eyes. The memories kept coming, one after another, each one adding weight to the understanding settling in my chest. My mother's soft manipulations, my father's silence that allowed it all to grow, Lydia's entitlement fed by years of being protected from consequences. I sank onto the couch again, breathing slowly. The afternoon light had begun to shift, stretching long shadows across the room. Mason sat down across from me, his face calm but serious, like he could see where my thoughts were heading. "You do not have to go back," he said quietly. For the first time in years, I believed him. The phone was silent for a rare moment, resting on the arm of the couch like it had exhausted itself. But I knew it would start again soon. And I knew that whatever was happening in that house, whatever panic had taken over since I walked out, was only the beginning of the fallout. I stared at the screen, waiting for the next vibration, and felt a new kind of clarity rising inside me, steady and unsentimental. I did not owe them my silence anymore. I did not owe them my life either. When the phone finally lit up again, I was ready. The screen glowed in my hand, but for once I did not feel the usual pull of obligation that used to come with every message from that house. I set the phone down and walked toward the guest room where Mason and Hannah kept a small desk beneath the window. The air in the room felt still, almost expectant, like it understood something was shifting even before I did. I pulled the chair out and sat down, letting my palms rest flat on the surface of the desk. My breathing slowed. My thoughts, which had been scattered and restless since the night before, finally organized themselves into something clear and steady. I knew what needed to happen. I knew it as surely as I had known when to walk into the hospital to see my father after his collapse, when to sell my company, when to leave that dinner table. Some choices do not arrive with fireworks or shouting. They come quietly, like a door swinging open in a room you forgot had another exit. I opened my laptop and waited for it to wake up. The familiar glow lit my face, and the icons lined up neatly on the screen felt strangely reassuring. I clicked into the folder labeled Marlowe House and watched as years of files unfolded before me: receipts, bank confirmations, records of utilities. A spreadsheet I had created during the pandemic that tracked every bill that went through my account. 5 years of being the silent support beam for a house that pretended it stood on its own. The numbers no longer stung me. They felt more like evidence now. Proof of what I had given, proof of what they had chosen not to see. I clicked into the auto payment tab for the utilities. The water bill came up first. I hovered over the cancel option for a long moment, not out of hesitation, but to acknowledge the weight of what I was doing. The house had run on my contributions for so long that I had forgotten it could function any other way. But this was not punishment. It was truth coming into alignment with reality. I clicked cancel. A confirmation window appeared. I typed yes. Electricity was next, then insurance, then property taxes. Each cancellation felt like lifting another brick off my chest. With each click, my shoulders felt lighter, my breath deeper. I had never realized how much of myself had been poured into those payments until I began reclaiming them. The mortgage came last. My name had been added temporarily for payment processing years ago, with the promise that we would revisit it once the crisis passed. That conversation never happened. I went to the contact folder on my desktop and opened the email thread with attorney Eleanor Price. We had spoken last month when I started to suspect that things were deeper than my parents admitted. She had drawn up the letter declaring I was withdrawing my authorization and financial responsibility for the account. Her final message glowed on the screen. Sign and return when ready. I opened the letter, my name at the top, the legal language that made everything real. I scrolled to the signature line and placed the cursor there. My heart thudded once, slow and heavy. As I typed my name with deliberate calm, Evan Marlowe, I stared at it for a moment, feeling something in me settle into place. Not triumph, not relief exactly, something quieter. Acknowledgement. A truth I had ignored for too long finally given form. I saved the document and sent it back to Eleanor with a simple message telling her I was ready. She would handle the rest. Next, I clicked into a folder labeled Household Records. I gathered everything I needed: the bills, the timelines, the summaries of payments, every piece of proof that showed the weight I had carried while the people in that house pretended it was invisible. I arranged it all neatly into a single PDF and printed it. The little printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting each page out in careful order. When it finished, I collected the stack and tapped it gently against the desk to straighten it. Then I placed it into a plain manila folder and pressed the flap closed. It felt heavier than the paper inside. Heavier with meaning. I leaned back in the chair, letting my eyes close for a moment. I could picture that folder sitting on the dining room table. I could picture Lydia flipping through the pages, realizing that every comfort she had relied on had come from my sacrifices, not our mother's careful planning or her own efforts. I could picture Patricia reading the summaries and remembering each time she told me not to make things harder, each time she told me family takes care of each other while she handed me another bill. I opened my eyes again. The clarity stayed. Standing, I walked back into the living room where Hannah was folding laundry on the couch. She looked up at me and paused when she saw the folder in my hand. "You sure?" she asked softly. I nodded. She did not ask anything else. Back in the entryway, I retrieved my jacket from the hook. I slid my phone into the pocket without checking it. Then I tucked the folder under my arm and opened the front door. The cold air hit me square in the face, sharp and bracing, like it was reminding me I was stepping into something new. The drive to Colorado Springs felt shorter than it had the night before. Maybe because I was thinking clearly for the first time in years. Maybe because I was no longer trying to convince myself of anything. I parked a block away from the house to give myself a moment before walking toward it. The house looked the same as always. Brown siding, a sagging porch step that had been on the repair list for 3 years. The curtains drawn even though it was midday, but something in the air felt different. Heavy, tense. I walked up the front steps quietly and gently placed the folder on the porch beside the door. I did not knock. I did not announce myself. I simply set it down, then reached for the Wi-Fi router box through the mail slot. It was where I kept the login information, something I had updated countless times whenever Lydia forgot her password. I opened my phone and changed the password again, this time choosing something random and unguessable, my own small line in the sand. A car passed slowly on the street, its tires crunching along the pavement. I straightened, took one last look at the door, then stepped away. Halfway down the sidewalk, I heard voices inside the house. Patricia's sharp tone, Lydia's raised one, something clattering onto the floor. I did not stop to listen. Whatever storm was gathering inside did not belong to me anymore. When I reached the car, I paused with my hand on the door handle. My heart was steady, my breathing even. I had expected to feel guilt, or fear, or at least some echo of responsibility pulling me back. Instead, I felt a strange lightness, like I had set down a burden I had carried so long I no longer recognized its weight. I got into the car and closed the door lightly, sealing myself into the quiet. For a moment I sat there, watching the house in the rearview mirror. The porch was still, the windows unmoving, but I knew the moment they found that folder, the truth inside would unfold like a spark catching on something dry and unresolved. I started the engine and eased away from the curb, letting the house slip out of view as I turned the corner. The sky stretched wide ahead of me, pale blue and open in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. I gripped the steering wheel lightly, letting the road guide me forward. By the time I reached the highway, the knot in my chest had dissolved. The choice was made, the line was drawn, and whatever came next would come without my participation. I drove north, the city growing smaller behind me, and felt the smallest sense of quiet forming inside me, steady and slow, like the beginning of something I had not allowed myself to imagine in years. The highway opened ahead of me in a long silver stretch, and for the first time in years, I drove without feeling someone else's needs tugging at me. The silence in the car was steady, almost soothing. I kept waiting for the guilt to creep in, to sit heavy in my chest the way it always had whenever my family spun into chaos, but it never came. Not this time. What settled in its place was a quiet certainty that I had finally done what I should have done years ago. By the time I pulled into Mason and Hannah's driveway again, the sun had begun to dip low, giving the sky a soft amber tint. I stepped out of the car with a steadier breath than I had taken all day. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of whatever Hannah had been cooking. Mason was sitting on the couch with a notebook open in front of him, tapping a pen absently against the page. He looked up as I walked in. "Everything all right?" he asked. I nodded, hung my jacket on the hook, and sank into the armchair across from him. My limbs felt tired, not from the drive, but from the kind of emotional exhaustion that comes after a long overdue decision. Hannah peeked out from the kitchen and smiled gently, as if acknowledging something she did not need me to explain. A few minutes passed before my phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then again. The sound no longer startled me, it barely even irritated me. I pulled it from my pocket and glanced at the screen. 6 missed calls from Lydia, 3 from Patricia, 1 from my parents' house line, 2 voicemails, a handful of texts. I opened none of them. Another buzz sounded, and this time a voicemail popped up. I pressed play out of some vague curiosity, expecting more of the same frantic demands Lydia had already left. Instead, I heard her voice crack with something sharper. "Evan, the internet is out, and I cannot get into my accounts. I have a client expecting the draft today, and I cannot even log in, and Mom is losing it. The power company said the automatic payment declined. Insurance, too. I do not know what you did, but you need to fix this." She paused, her breath shaky like she was pacing the kitchen. "You cannot just disappear and let all this fall apart. You are being cruel." I stopped the message. Mason glanced up from his notebook, raising an eyebrow. "More drama," he said quietly. I nodded, but something in my chest shifted, not painfully, but with finality. I realized that even in her panic, Lydia still believed I was responsible for stitching everything back together. Not once had she asked if I was okay. Not once had she acknowledged the folder I left behind, or the truth inside it. Instead, she did what she always did: demanded, blamed, assumed I owed her an explanation. A text from my mother followed almost immediately. "Evan, the water bill says the payment was canceled. The mortgage notice says we need to respond within 30 days. Please call. This is not like you." I read it twice. The wording felt familiar in the worst way. Concern wrapped around expectation. Fear wrapped around a quiet accusation. I locked the screen and set the phone down. Hannah brought in a cup of tea and placed it gently on the side table. She sat beside Mason, her expression soft. They did not ask if I planned to respond. They did not suggest I should. They simply existed with me in that quiet space. The first place in a long time where I had been allowed to breathe without explanation. Eventually, we decided to take a walk. The evening air in Denver carried a crispness that cleared my head. We walked slowly down the neighborhood street, passing porch lights flickering on one by one. Somewhere a sprinkler chattered to life. A dog barked at nothing in particular. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from the power company, automated but direct, informing me that my payment information had been removed and the next bill would need to be handled by another authorized account holder. Another buzz followed from the insurance provider, another from the property tax portal. 3 years ago, this kind of cascade would have sent me into panic mode. I would have dropped everything, driven home, and spent the evening fixing every issue while Lydia complained in the background and Patricia sighed dramatically about the stress she was under. But tonight, hearing those messages, I felt something else. A strange calm, like the falling pieces were not mine to catch. We got back to the house just as the sky turned deeper blue. Inside, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle again. My phone buzzed once more, and this time it was Lydia calling. Then calling again. Then again, barely 10 seconds apart. Finally, worn down by the noise, I pressed play on the latest voicemail. Her voice burst through the speaker. "Evan, answer your phone. I lost the new client because I cannot access anything and Mom is freaking out and I need the Wi-Fi password and everything is shutting down. You cannot just cut us off. This is not fair." A pause, then a whisper that was somehow sharper than her shouting. "You owe us an explanation." I stared at the phone, feeling the familiar heat climb up the back of my neck. Not anger, not shame, something closer to disbelief. After everything I had done, after the thousands of dollars and the years and the sacrifices they never even acknowledged. She still believed I owed her something. I stood and walked toward the window, needing distance from the sound of her voice. Outside, the first street lamp flickered on. A car rolled past, headlights cutting briefly across the room. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, not resigned, not frightened, just steady. Behind me, the phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Patricia. "We need to discuss the bills. The mortgage notice came today. You should not have taken your name off without warning." My breath left me in a slow, controlled exhale. Warning, as if 5 years of shouldering every financial burden without a single thank you had been a courtesy. As if my walking away required a meeting or a family vote. A quiet sound escaped me, something halfway between disbelief and the smallest bitter laugh. Mason looked up. "What happened now?" I turned from the window and sat back down. "They think I should have warned them." His eyebrows lifted, then lowered as comprehension sank in. He shook his head slowly. "That is not your job anymore." I nodded, but even as I tried to let it go, another message arrived. Then another. The tide of panic was rising back home, and every sound of it pressed up against the boundaries I had carved out for myself only hours before. The last message came while I was in the middle of drinking my tea. A voicemail. I hesitated before listening, bracing myself. "Evan," it was Uncle Henry's voice this time. Calm but edged with worry. "Your mom asked me to call. She said something is going very wrong at the house and she cannot reach you. She is scared. If you can, give her a call." I felt my stomach tighten. Not because I wanted to go back, not because I felt pulled into the chaos again, but because the ripple was widening. The family was reaching outward, grasping for anyone who might pull me back into the old role. I set the phone down slowly. The house in Colorado Springs was beginning to feel the absence it had ignored for so long. Bills were surfacing, deadlines tightening, services expecting payment they had not prepared to take responsibility for. Lydia was losing her contracts. Patricia was facing the consequences she had tried to outrun, and the truth I had placed in that folder was settling over them with a weight they could not deny. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and exhaled. The falling apart had begun, and I knew it was only the beginning. Outside, the last of the daylight slipped away, leaving the room washed in a dim, gentle glow. A moment of stillness arrived, quiet and deep, and I let myself sink into it. Whatever storm was coming next would come without my involvement. And for the first time in my life, that realization did not scare me. That stillness lasted only a few minutes before my phone lit up again with a name I had not expected to see at my door that night. A knock sounded, firm but uneven, like the person on the other side had rehearsed it twice before letting their knuckles fall. Mason looked toward me from the couch, eyebrows raised. I felt something tighten in my chest before I even stood. When I opened the door, my mother was standing there on the porch, wrapped in her long gray coat with her purse held tightly against her side. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders a little hunched, her eyes red but dry. She did not step forward. She did not try to hug me. She simply stood there, staring at me with a face caught between worry and exhaustion. "Evan," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Her voice was thin, not angry, not commanding, just stretched too far. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room with the hesitant steps of someone entering a place they were not sure they were welcome. Hannah greeted her gently and disappeared into the kitchen, giving us space. My mother sat on the edge of the chair near the window, smoothing her coat across her lap. She looked around the room as if searching for the right place to rest her eyes, then finally settled on me. "Everything is falling apart at the house," she began. There was a tremor in her voice, but she pressed through it. "The bills are all past due. The notices are coming every day." I did not realize how serious it was. I sat across from her, hands clasped loosely, waiting, not rescuing, not filling the silence for her, just waiting. She swallowed hard. When she continued, her voice grew even softer. "There were letters from the mortgage company. They are saying we are very close to losing the house, and the insurance sent a cancellation notice. And then Lydia started shouting because she lost some client thing and everything happened so fast." Her fingers twisted at the edge of her coat, tightening and loosening like she was trying to wring the truth out of herself. "I found what you left on the table," she said, her voice nearly breaking. "The folder, the records, the letter from your attorney. I did not know you had paid that much." I did not know how much you had managed on your own. You did not want to know, I said quietly. Her eyes flicked up to mine. For a second, she looked like she might deny it. But then her face collapsed into something tired and honest. Maybe I did not, she admitted. Maybe I did not because I thought if I kept everything together long enough, things would settle. But I should have said something. I should have told you what was happening with the mortgage. I made mistakes. The words hung there, fragile and unfamiliar coming from her. She rarely admitted fault. Almost never. It always surprised me how much control she tried to maintain. Even when things were crumbling, I kept looking at her, waiting for the rest. There was always more. She took a deeper breath. Lydia has been coming apart since you left. She keeps saying this is your fault, that you overreacted, that you did not have to make some big point. But I know this did not happen overnight. Things have been slipping for a long time. My jaw tightened at the word slipping. Slipping implied an accident. Slipping implied no one had been standing by while I carried the weight. Mom, things did not slip, I said. And my voice came out steadier than I expected. They were handed to me. Every bill, every crisis, every responsibility. I only stepped back for a day and the entire structure collapsed. She looked at her hands, twisting them together again. I know, I see it now. I should have seen it sooner. A long silence followed. Not hostile, not brittle, just thick with years of unspoken truths. She lifted her eyes again, and when she did, I saw a kind of fear there that startled me. Not fear of me, but fear of what was happening in her own home. Evan, I do not know how to fix this. I do not know where to start. This time I did not step in. I did not offer ideas or strategies or reassurances. Instead, I asked the question that had been sitting on my tongue since she walked through the door. Why did you hide those mortgage letters? Her face tightened. She blinked slowly, as if bracing herself. Because I did not want you to worry, she whispered. You had already done so much. And I thought if we just had a little more time, we could catch up. I thought it was temporary. I thought I could shield you from the worst of it. I shook my head slowly. Shielding me was never what you were doing. You were shielding yourself from having to face how bad it was. Her lips parted. But she did not argue. She did not contradict me. For once, she just listened. I continued, my voice calm. You asked me to help. And I did, weren't you? For years. But instead of working with me, you kept things from me. You relied on me, but you did not trust me. You let Lydia believe I owed you everything, and you never corrected her. You let her treat me like I was disposable. My mother looked down again. Her shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen before. She whispered, I did not mean to hurt you. I nodded slightly. I know, but meaning to or not, you did. She drew in a shaky breath, then lifted her gaze, trying to steady it. Your father has not stopped pacing since this morning. He feels awful that he did not say anything last night. He wanted to come with me, but I told him he should rest. He has been talking about how he should have been the one handling all this, not you. The guilt, the fear, the unraveling. I could picture all of it happening in that house as clearly as if I was standing in the hallway watching it unfold. But what struck me most was something I had not expected. My mother looked lost. Not manipulative, not defensive, just lost. She looked at me again with a kind of fragile hope. Can you just come by, even for a moment? Just to help us understand what to do next. I leaned back slightly, letting her words settle before responding. I cannot come back in and fix this, I said gently. The things falling apart are the things I have held up alone for years. You will need to speak to the mortgage company yourselves, the utilities, the insurance. You will need to take ownership of your home again. That is what all of you should have been doing long before last night. Her eyes filled, but she held back tears in the way she always had, with an almost dignified determination. She nodded slowly, like the truth was breaking her open in small measured pieces. Another pause stretched between us as she gathered her things. She stood after a moment, smoothing her coat again. I did not follow her to the door. She looked around the room once more, her expression softening just slightly. Evan, she said quietly, I am sorry. The words drifted out like she was not sure she had the right to say them. I gave her a small nod. She walked to the door and opened it. The porch light spilled across her face, revealing how tired she looked. She hesitated once, then stepped outside into the cold evening air. I watched her walk down the driveway to her car, Her steps looked uncertain, as if she was not sure how the ground worked anymore without me holding everything steady. When the door clicked shut behind her, the room went silent again. I lowered myself onto the couch, my hands resting loosely in my lap, my breath finding a slow, even rhythm. For the first time in a long time, I realized that I did not feel angry. I did not feel vindicated. I felt something closer to acceptance. The truth was out. The weight had shifted, and whatever happened next inside that house would happen without me. I let my head fall back against the cushion, listening to the quiet, letting it settle deep into me. The unraveling had begun, and I was not going back. The quiet after my mother left stayed with me long into the night. I sat on the couch listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant whir of a passing car, the small familiar sounds of a house that was not mine, but still felt safe in a way my childhood home never had. At some point, Mason turned off the hallway light and told me he and Hannah were heading to bed. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I was fine. For once, I meant it. Sleep came in pieces, light and fragile at first, then deeper, then broken again by the soft buzz of a notification on my phone. I refused to check. When morning finally filtered through the blinds, my body felt stiff, but my mind was oddly clear. A different kind of quiet had settled inside me. Not peace exactly, but a calm acceptance of what could not be undone. I got up, made coffee in the Kellogg's kitchen, and stood near the window watching a thin line of golden sunlight stretch across the street. For the first time in months, I was not thinking about how to make ends meet for a house that was not mine. I was not rehearsing what I owed or adjusting my life around someone else's expectations. The shift was small but unmistakable. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, expecting another message from my mother or Lydia. But the notification was from an email address I recognized immediately, Eleanor Price, my attorney. I opened it. Evan, your withdrawal has been processed. The mortgage lender has confirmed receipt of the documentation. You are no longer responsible for any portion of the balance or delinquency. Let me know if you need anything further. I stared at the email for a long moment, letting the words sink in. No longer responsible. The finality of it settled into my bones like a weight being gently removed. I set the phone down and took a slow sip of coffee. The bitterness tasted strangely clean, as if on cue. The phone buzzed again, a voicemail this time. I hesitated before playing it, bracing myself. It was Lydia. Her voice was strained in that high-pitched way she used when she felt overwhelmed, but still wanted control. Evan, I do not know what you did, but everything is unraveling. Mom says the mortgage notice is worse than we thought. And I lost another client because I could not get online. I had to call the grocery store back, and they want me to start the overnight shift tonight. I cannot do that. I am not built for that kind of work. She let out a small, choked laugh, the kind people make when they are trying not to cry. I do not understand why you walked away. You should have talked to us. You should have explained what you were doing. You cannot just leave us drowning. I ended the message before it finished. Something inside me tightened, not from guilt, but from the realization that even now she did not grasp what had happened. She still believed my absence was the problem, not the years leading up to it. Mason walked into the kitchen then, rubbing the back of his neck. Bad news, he asked. Not for me, I answered. He raised an eyebrow but did not push. Later that afternoon, I received another message, this time from a number I had not expected. It was a representative from the county office letting me know the delinquent tax notice had been delivered by mail to the Marlowe home. I thanked them and ended the call. The knot in my chest loosened a little more. Around 3 in the afternoon, I got a call from an old acquaintance, Victor Hale. He owned a chain of small floral shops throughout Denver and Colorado Springs and had been looking for a financial consultant for months. We had spoken casually a while back, but I never followed up because I could not imagine leaving my family's financial mess long enough to take on anything new. Now his timing felt almost uncanny. He said he needed someone to streamline the bookkeeping for the entire business, rebuild the reporting systems, and advise on expansion. He offered a contract with flexible hours and a salary that exceeded what I had earned at my last job. For a long moment, I could not speak. It felt like stepping into sunlight after living too long in a shadow. I told him I would come in for a meeting. He sounded relieved, even excited. When I hung up the phone, Something inside me shifted for good. I went for a walk in the neighborhood to clear my head. Denver air had a crispness that made everything feel sharper. Kids were riding bikes on the sidewalk. A dog barked at a mail carrier. Two women in heavy coats stood chatting beside a car. Normal life unfolding around me. Life that had nothing to do with the unraveling happening back in Colorado Springs. Halfway down the street, I checked my phone again. Another message had come through. This time from my father. His voicemails were rare. He had always been a man of silence, letting Patricia and Lydia fill the air around him. I pressed play. Evan. His voice was soft, shaky. I know I should have said something sooner. I should have spoken up last night. And all the nights before that. I am sorry, son. I am so sorry. The message ended there. No excuses. No explanation. Just a short, cracked apology that felt more genuine than anything I had heard from him in years. I stood still on the sidewalk for a long time, letting the words settle. My father's apology did not fix anything, but it did something quieter. It acknowledged the truth. And sometimes acknowledgement is the only thing you have left to give someone you love, but failed. By evening, the messages from home had slowed. Not stopped entirely, but slowed. I suspected they were too busy scrambling to keep up with the fallout. Utility notices piling up, insurance calls, mortgage reminders. Lydia forced to get ready for her overnight shift. Patricia trying to understand how quickly the ground beneath her had shifted. I sat on the porch outside the Kellogg's house as the sky darkened. The air smelled like cold pine. Porch lights flickered on across the street. Footsteps echoed faintly from a neighbor's driveway. For the first time since I left the Marlowe home, I felt present in my own body. My mind was not darting to the next crisis or strategizing how to protect people who did not protect me. The silence inside me was not heavy now. It felt like space. Space to rebuild. Space to breathe. It was still strange to imagine my family grappling with responsibilities they had pushed onto me for years. Strange to imagine the house without me holding the beam steady. But it was also right. Necessary. Honest. I stayed on the porch until the air grew colder and the street emptied. When I finally stood to go inside, a thought drifted through me slow and steady. Letting go was not the harsh act they believed it was. It was the first true act of survival I had taken in years. And the consequences unfolding in that house were simply the truth rearranging itself. I opened the front door and stepped into the warm light of the living room, feeling, for the first time in a very long while, like the life ahead of me was genuinely mine. Inside the living room, the warmth settled over me like a blanket that had been waiting for years. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet soak in. Something about this stillness felt different from all the other nights I had spent here. It was steadier, more certain, as if the life I had been borrowing space in was finally beginning to feel like one I could build for myself. The next few days moved in a rhythm that felt almost new. I met with Victor Hale in his Denver office. He greeted me with the kind of handshake that carried both relief and expectation. His floral business was bigger than I remembered, and the backlog of financial work he needed handled was substantial. But it was the kind of challenge I once loved, the kind of challenge I had given up when I stepped back into the chaos of my family's life. Sitting across from him in that small conference room, outlining goals and building a timeline, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel in years. I felt capable, not stretched thin, not pulled apart by obligations I never agreed to. Just capable. By the time I walked out with a signed consulting contract tucked inside my bag, the sky above the city had turned the pale pink of early evening. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something I needed to run toward or away from. It felt like something I could walk into at my own pace. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood south of downtown Denver. The place was bare at first, just a few pieces of furniture and a stack of boxes in the corner, but it felt peaceful. The windows let in a spill of morning light that reached across the hardwood floors, and at night I could hear the steady hum of traffic from the main road. It reminded me that life went on whether I was carrying the weight of a sinking household or not. On my second night there, I found an envelope slipped under my door. I knew the handwriting before I even picked it up. My sister's letters had always looked rushed, slanted, like she wrote in motion even when she was sitting still. I opened it slowly, bracing myself. The letter was long and uneven. scribbled in a way that made the ink skip in places. She apologized for yelling, then she justified it. She apologized for blaming me, then insisted she had been overwhelmed. She apologized for saying I owed them something, then followed it with a paragraph about how families should stay together in hard times. It was an apology wrapped tightly in excuses, and when I finished reading it, I placed it back in the envelope without a word. A day later, a second envelope arrived. This one was from my mother. Her words were clearer, more careful. She spoke about missing me, about wanting to rebuild something between us, about being confused by how fast everything had changed, but she never mentioned the imbalance, never spoke the truth of how long it had been building, never acknowledged the years I had given that she quietly accepted. I set her letter beside Lydia's, not out of anger, but out of a quiet understanding that some things do not heal just because someone asks for them to. The third envelope came the following evening. When I saw the handwriting, my breath caught in my chest. It was my father's, steady, plain, a little shaky from age. I opened it and unfolded the single sheet inside. Son, I should have said something years ago. I should have stood up for you. I should have told them the truth. I saw everything you did. Every bill, every sacrifice. Every time you kept this family from falling apart. I let them lean on you because I was tired and afraid. That was my failure, not yours. He wrote about the night I left the house, how he had watched me stand up and walk away, wanting to follow but knowing the moment would not have changed if he had. He wrote that he loved me, that he believed in the person I had become, that he was proud of the life I was building even if he had not helped me build it. I sat on the floor of my apartment holding that letter for a long time. My throat tightened, not with grief, not with anger, but with something quieter, something like release. My father had never been a loud man, but in those words he had given me the truth my mother and sister were not yet able to give. Accountability, recognition, acknowledgement of the years I had spent invisible in their home. I placed his letter in the top drawer of my nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed as evening settled through the windows. The world felt different somehow, less heavy, more mine. Weeks passed, and with every day that followed, life began to take on a rhythm that felt steady and intentional. I worked with Victor's company, untangling financial knots and restructuring their systems. I drank morning coffee on my small balcony and watched the city wake up below me. I walked home from the light rail station in the evenings and felt my body relax in ways it had not relaxed in years. I heard bits and pieces of updates from Colorado Springs as time went on. A message from Paula saying the house had been listed for sale. A brief voicemail from my mother saying they were moving into a smaller apartment across town. A quiet text from my father thanking me again and telling me not to worry. I kept the distance not out of resentment, but out of understanding. They needed to learn to live inside the world they had shaped without expecting me to hold it together. One evening I came home from work and paused in the doorway of my apartment, looking at the room filled with the soft glow of lamplight. It felt warm and lived in at last, like a life growing roots, not a placeholder, not a borrowed refuge, my own. I walked to the window and looked out over the quiet street. Cars lined the curb. A woman walked her dog on the sidewalk. Somewhere a porch light clicked on, and something inside me settled with a certainty I had not felt in a long while. I had not won a battle. I had not delivered a punishment. What I had done was simpler and far more powerful. I had stepped away. I had allowed consequences to land where they belonged. And my family had been forced to face the truth they had spent years avoiding. Sometimes the most profound act of survival is letting the weight you were never meant to carry finally fall. I turned from the window and sat down at the small dining table, breathing in the quiet. My life stretched ahead of me in an open line, no longer tangled with old obligations or silent expectations. Before I began writing in my journal, I thought of the people who might hear this story, people who had carried more than their share, people who had been told they owed what others took for granted, people who knew what it felt like to walk away not in anger, but in clarity. And I asked the question that had stayed with me since the night everything began. If you have been listening to my story, I wonder which part stayed with you the most. Let me know. I would truly like to hear it.